welcome to another edition of the Dublin Coffman Marching Band Network. If you enjoy this series, please like and subscribe so you can stay current with all of our amazing graduates. Also, check the description for information about the Dublin Coffman Marching Band Network. And you'll also find my new book called Make Your Footprints, a life skills book for young adults. We are here today with Angee Gerardi, a 1990 grad of Dublin High School. How are you, Angee?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm
I
doing.
didn't know you wrote a book. That's awesome. Congratulations. That's great.
I remember back in 1990 you being the star of our jazz band and one of our great members of our marching band and concert band. And to know that you have stayed in the world of music is just amazing. Currently, Angee goes by her name, Casey Carter. For all of us, as you learn more about Angee, you'll want to learn about Casey Carter because that is the name she goes by professionally. But you are a program director and DJ that works for iHeart music, which is something that's found all across the United States. And ironically, you are listened to all across the United States. Can you break down where you're living right now and how you are heard all across the nation?
Yeah, I currently live in New Orleans, Louisiana. This is my second time living here, and I'm not leaving this time. I learned my lesson the first time. And it's funny because you talk about how I was in jazz band. It's like all the songs that we played. You know, it's amazing to get into the history of music in New Orleans and just realize like how much of that goes back to stage band at Dublin High School. So it's pretty cool. I work in country radio for iHeart Media and iHeart Radio, and I've got a couple hats that I wear throughout iHeart. My first and foremost job is here in New Orleans, where I oversee our country station. I oversee the programming for it, and then I'm on the air Monday through Friday, or technically Sunday through Friday, from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. I also have a role within iHeart where I work with some of our smaller stations. We refer to them as custom stations. I guess the thinking came behind that with, back in the day, some of the smaller stations were putting out to be real, putting out some of the not greatest radio that we've heard. So a company the size of iHeart with the assets that we have, we've got some really, really cool stuff that we come to play with. Why not make those smaller radio stations sound big and amazing? So I work with about 75, 76 of our smaller country stations doing that. But my first job in radio was to be a disc jockey, and I can't quite let that go yet. So I'm on the air here in New Orleans every afternoon, mention that. I also, through the magic of computers, am on the air every weekday, Monday through Friday, in Fort Myers, Florida. And then on the weekends, I do air shifts there in Columbus at WCOL, 4 to 7 every Saturday afternoon, as well as Cleveland, Charlotte, Raleigh, Las Vegas. And then back to those smaller stations, I do one show for them that pumps out to about 22, 23 of those radio stations. So, and then in between I sleep and I try to go hear local music because we've got some amazing local music here in New Orleans.
Well, many of us have maybe a very basic background for what a radio DJ does. However, a program director is something unfamiliar to myself and probably to many people. Can you break down what a program director does?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out myself. No, it's my favorite aspect of radio. It's basically taking a radio station and constructing it from the bottom up. So, I work in country radio. So, first and foremost, the job is just making sure that we're playing the right music on the air. And I've got a lot of tools. What's funny is, I've been such a music fan my entire life, from, playing saxophone there at Dublin and playing with records and cassettes and CDs growing up. And I just love music, which is ultimately what got me into radio. But I quickly learned in the role of a program director, it's okay to love music. You just can't put that love of music into the role, because sometimes there might be a Tim McGraw song that I think is the greatest song, but I get all of this data and research, and my listeners might think differently. And I'm just picking on Tim McGraw because there's actually a Tim McGraw poster over in front of me. But you know, so that's where it becomes hard to be such a lover of music, because you got to take your personal opinion out of it, and you got to think like somebody that listens to your radio station, as opposed to what do I like, you know. So first and foremost, you got to choose the right music for your listeners and what you're trying to do with your radio station. As you're driving down the road and you're listening to WCOL or WNCI, you hear like little sound effects and a big voice between the songs. You know, you're listening to 92.3 WCOL, Columbus's #1 for new country. You know, that's the station voice. I'll write all of that stuff and send it off to the station voice. And then we have another guy that does what's called imaging, that puts all the sound effects behind all that and then sends it back to me. And then I dump it in the computer system and schedule where that goes. And then also schedule where we have our disc jockeys talk. Certain initiatives within both my local radio station here and within iHeart in general, you know, I'll tell the disc jockeys that you need to talk about this, but they're also encouraged to talk about things on their own. For instance, any on-air person that wasn't talking about, you know, Will Smith slapping Chris Rock on Monday, that they're kind of missing a pop culture moment. So it's also important for the on-air people to do their own research and stay in touch with what's going on, but it's also my job to make sure that they know what's going on from a station level and a company level.
So now you didn't begin your career as a program director. So take us through, not necessarily right out of high school, but take us through your first couple of jobs and how you worked your way to the job you have now.
Yeah, when I graduated in June 3rd of 1990, my plan was that I actually was going to go into music, and was just still kind of undecided as to how I was going to go into music. I mean, back then, like, I was so inspired by David Sanborn. Like, David Sanborn was it for me, right? But I kind of thought to myself, like, is that feasible? You know, I mean, I'd like to say yes, but I also was sort of a negative Nelly back then. There was another side of me that's just always been so fascinated with radio. You know, as a kid, walking around with my little portable record player and pretending like I was a disc jockey. And then, you know, in the 1980s, when 92X used to be around, which is now WCOL, but back in the day, 92X, they had this woman on at night named Susie Wad that was just like the coolest, right? And I'm like, oh man, I kind of want to be the next Susie Wad. So found that there was a broadcasting school that used to be in Columbus over on Morse Road, across from where Northland Mall was, and went to that starting in August of 1990. And if I'm being real, didn't learn a whole lot there, but what I did learn was that radio's one of those weird little mediums where if you don't have experience, nobody's going to hire you, and you can't get experience unless you get hired somewhere. So it's like this bad circle. And so, you know, some of the best advice that I ever got was just get your foot in the door somewhere, anywhere. And so I got an internship at a radio station in Marion, and was driving from Dublin up to Marion a couple days a week and interning up there. And a couple weeks later, they gave me my first job. And it was not what I wanted to do at that point in my life. I wanted to be like a really cool rock and roll disc jockey, you know. I wanted to go work for QFM 96. And this radio station was not like that. They played a lot of old music and catered to the older crowd. But I had my foot in the door and I was learning. And so 4 months after that, the other radio station in Marion, which was kind of like a softish top 40, not quite as cool as WNCI, but they offered me a job. And still not what I wanted to do, because I still wanted to be that cool rock and roll disc jockey, you know. But I went over there just because it was a little bit more suited to me. And I worked there for a while until I got my first full-time job in radio, and that was in Charlotte, North Carolina. So that was the first time I picked up and moved, and I did nights at a kind of an alternative top 40 station in Charlotte, still with the goal of being a rock and roll disc jockey someday. I wanted to be like in one of the big major markets. Like I wanted to go to Los Angeles or New York or Chicago, or, you know, just a big major market. bounced around a couple jobs, found myself unemployed and back in Dublin living at my mom and dad's house and and reevaluating my life. And that was I was about 20 years old at that point, 20, 21 years old. And my mom used to have a tanning salon on Sawmill Road, and I was working at the tanning salon one day, and this woman came walking in wearing a sweatshirt with a radio station on it, and we got to talking, and come to find out, her husband was the general manager of WCOL, and they had just flipped to from oldies to country. So this was 1994 that this happened, because WCOL flipped to country on Valentine's Day of 1994. And she's like, we don't have any full-time on-air jobs, but we need weekend people and people in promotions. And I'm like, yes. So didn't know the first thing about country music. Like, I had heard of Garth Brooks, didn't know what a George Strait was, knew nothing, but got my foot in the door at WCOL when it first went country. And that's when my entire world got flipped upside down, because after working in country music for a little while, I no longer wanted to be a rock and roll disc jockey. You know, I just threw it out the window. I didn't want to go to New York and play rock music. I wanted to be a program director. And that's what kind of led me down the road to learn to be a program director. So I set out on a path, like, how are we going to do this? And I very methodically moved from job to job to job and worked my way up, and here I am.
What is something now that you look back on? Our kids, I would say, are learning hard lessons in the world of delayed gratification. Everything is so immediate in our youth's lives right now. But in the story that you just talked about, there was failure, there was opportunity, and so what is it that you look back on in that regard, that you had to wait a long time, however all the pieces came together for you?
You know, radio went through a really weird time starting in 1996 when it was deregulated by the federal government. I mean, when you and I were growing up, there was a different owner for every radio station. And then it was deregulated to the point of you could have one owner owning 2 AMs and 2 FMs. And then it was deregulated even further, which is where we are now. And that's why you see companies like iHeart that have a whole lot of radio stations in Columbus. And, you know, we've got 8 here in New Orleans and whatnot. And that was really, really tough, because as radio started deregulating and these companies were snatching up everybody, they were paying too much money for these radio stations and had less money to pay employees. But they were also starting to figure out, like, we could take this one employee, and instead of just having them on the air, they could do this and this and this. And so the amount of employees in radio started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And there was a couple times where I found myself budget cutting out of a job, and that is the scariest thing, because it's not like you can just, it's not like somebody's going to create a job for you in most instances. You know, I mean, you've got to wait and you've got to look for a job that's open, and then you got to compete against a whole lot of other people and convince them that you're the one. So, I mean, that was a lesson in tough skin, I think, if anything. I think, you know, the gratification in radio comes just from, you know, sometimes something as simple as just being on the air and saying, like, that was really fun today. Or in my role as program director, I'm the lucky one that, you know, the record labels in Nashville always want to get you in front of their artists, and you always get a lot of FaceTime. So, I mean, it's, you know, Luke Combs playing here at our arena a couple months ago, and it's like, hey, come early and have drinks with Luke Combs before he goes on stage, you know? So, I mean, so that's the gratification part, but it also takes a lot of work to get there. So does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. So that actually led me to my next question. When what in your job, you've gotten to meet a bunch of celebrities, and I've seen through your social media posts over the years just some neat situations, meet and greets. Has there been one moment that you might share with us where you just kind of, you know, had an experience and you just realized, hey, I got an awesome job?
Well, definitely having drinks with Luke Combs before his sold out show a couple months ago. You know, Dan and Shay have a soft spot in my heart. Like, I kind of got to know them. It's pretty typical, and country radio is really the only format that does this. But typical that when Nashville signs a new artist to their label, they go out on what's called a radio tour, and they go from city to radio station to radio station, introducing these artists to, you know, radio programmers like myself. And the sad part of that job is when somebody signed to a major record label, you already know they're really, really, really good. And so pretty much everybody that walks through the radio station door and does a little personal concert for us is good. But what's sad is it's such a very, very, very small percentage of those artists that we meet that we ever see again, that make it, you know. Dan and Shay are ones that just, they at the beginning of their career, they did everything for radio. They came into the radio station. They spent a lot of time with us. They came back. We opened up I was in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time. We opened up a performing studio there in our radio station. They came and did a big event for some of our key clients where they played. And at this time, nobody knows who Dan and Shay is, by the way. You know, it's just Dan and Shay is another, you know, they might as well be Bob and Jim, you know. Because nobody knew what a Dan and Shay was. But, you know, they made that relationship with radio. And then a couple months later, they come back and play a club. And it's this pretty decent sized club that they're in. And there's like maybe 100 people that showed up. And by the way, when you put 100 people in a pretty decent sized club, it looks really bad. But they just kept grinding and they kept that relationship going with radio. So, you know, to this day, you know, if it's my birthday, I get a text from Dan, like, hey, Casey, how you doing? Happy birthday. You know, and they call me Casey because that's how they know me. They were playing our arena a couple months ago, and just in the middle of their set, they stopped down and they're like, hey, you know what? We wouldn't be where we were if it weren't for country radio. And that girl right over there, Casey Carter, she's been a believer in us from the beginning. And everybody in the arena is like looking around. And my boyfriend just happened to be recording it at the time. And he's like, whoa. And, you know, so, I mean, so those are definite pinch me moments where, you know, it's, you never expect something like that. But when it happens, you're like, holy crap, like Dan and Shay have sold millions and millions of records. And I remember when they couldn't sell 100 concert tickets and now they're at a sold out arena, like thanking me, like, what is happening here, you know? So there's been some moments like that across the years, you know, when you go to, you know, when back in the mid 2000s, when Capitol Records brings Luke Bryan in and he had just got signed and he was playing basketball, had a big Band-Aid across his head from getting beat up playing basketball and had to have plastic surgery, you know, and then to see what he's become, you know, it's really pretty, and to see him every year along the way, you know, at his tour or whatever, it's pretty cool.
Well, not every day does Dan and Shay get to give you a shout out. So here you are, you're showing up to work every day, and and you're in the grind. What is it about just the day-to-day activities of your job that you also enjoy?
I love listening to the music that comes through. You know, like I say, I can't put my personal opinion into it, but it's really exciting. Like I remember our company, iHeart, you know, we had done something with some record labels a couple of years ago where the record labels were just asked to submit their new artists and whatnot. And I didn't want to have any preconceived notions. So it was a playlist of about 20 songs from maybe 5 or 6 different artists. And I didn't want to have any preconceived notions by looking at the names. So I just let it play through and I made myself notes like, I like song number 2. I like song number 4. I like song number 7. And then when I got done, I looked to see who sang these songs, and it was 2 artists that kept coming up. It was Luke Combs and Morgan Wallen. And this was before anybody had heard of them, right? And so, you know, it's kind of cool to say like, hey, like I got to hear, you know, radio people got to hear Luke Combs and Morgan Wallen before they busted wide open, you know? So I love that aspect of the job is hearing what Nashville has to bring us. Now, that said, for every Luke Combs and Morgan Wallen, they also bring us some really, really bad stuff. But it's also kind of fun hearing that too, because, you know, if you think about country music, like we don't sound like George Jones and Loretta Lynn anymore. And it doesn't even sound like 90s country anymore. And then 2000s country had a definite sound. And now we've gotten artists like Morgan Wallen and Luke Combs are starting to swing us back a little bit more traditional, but we've also got the Dan and Shays of the world that are pop too. And country has just really expanded, and it's really kind of cool to hear what Nashville's bringing to the table to expand country music and to try to grow country music and to try to find that next artist that's going to be the next big thing. So I love that aspect of my job. I also love the creative thing. I mean, one of the things I forgot to mention when you were asking what a program director does is, promotions that we do on the radio station. I love putting that stuff together. We had done a really fun promotion last year when lockdown happened. There's a new artist named Hardy, and here in New Orleans, Mardi Gras was pretty much called off because of the pandemic, and so we teamed up with Hardy and did like Hardy Gras, and had him do Zoom concerts for winners, and and stuff like that. Like, I love putting together things like that too. So there's a lot of fun aspects of being in radio.
Well, Angee, if Casey Carter, I mean, this is going to be a fun, because I love asking this question, but if the now Casey Carter, your stage name, got a chance to talk to Angee Gerardi, the sophomore or junior in high school, and you had a lesson that you wanted to make sure that the younger yourself knew, what would they say to each other?
Probably shut up and listen more. Particularly in radio, you find a lot of people that build themselves up, and sometimes when they build themselves up, they're not as big as the mountain they're building, if that makes any sense. I always, because I got fired a couple times early on in my career and had a hard time finding a new job, I'd like to think that I was probably one of the less cocky ones because I had gotten knocked around a little bit. But at the same time, when I was coming up in my earlier jobs, I wish I would have spent a little bit more time learning, which now I'm still, even with the role that I have, I'm still constantly trying to learn. And I think if I were younger, I would have spent more time learning. But then on the flip side of things, it's funny how it all came around, because like right now I'm exactly where I want to be. And had I done anything different, I wouldn't have been on this path, but I think learning is just so important. Always, never stop learning. So that's what I would tell me. Like, don't stop learning, and don't stop playing your saxophone. Jeremy, can I just tell you, like, being around New Orleans, radio aside, I mean, like, I've got such a love for jazz music that comes from stage band, back in the days of being in stage band and going to those jazz festivals and whatnot. And we've got this treasure here in New Orleans called Preservation Hall, which is a little room, and they come out and play, and it's just like, I tear up every time I'm in there. They very rarely have saxophone players in there. It's usually like a trumpet, a trombone, a piano, a drummer. Yeah. But like, the music in and around New Orleans inspires me so much. And I've still got one of my altos here and my soprano that I had in high school, and they both need repadded. If I were to put a mouthpiece and a reed on them right now, it wouldn't be pretty. But I haven't played in years and years and years and years, and that is one regret that I have, is that I didn't continue to play, and I mean to. But man, the students in your band, like, they've got a gift that they can, like, what a great way to just relieve stress and just go have some fun, so don't stop playing.
I love it. Hey, Angee, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk to our kids, and not only our kids, but our entire band family. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Did I point out my Band on the Run shirt?
Hey, look at that. Awesome.
Yeah, and congratulations to you and everybody that puts this stuff together, because there's more logos on the back of the shirt than most average 5Ks have. So good job for you and the sponsors. That's great. That is great.
We have a wonderful community here supporting Dublin Coffman Marching Band. Thank you so much.
Never stop giving to Dublin Coffman Marching Band, and because that's important. That's important.
Thank you so much, Angee.
Sure.